Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into the Apache Wars. And to help us navigate this complex part of history, we're going to be taking a close look at an interview with historian Douglas Hawking from the American History Hit podcast.
It's a great interview. A lot of insights from Hawking that can really help us understand this period.
Hmm.
People may think of the Apache Wars like it was one big conflict, but
Yeah.
it was really a series of clashes and alliances.
Right.
Even betrayals that went on, well, for decades.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how even the term Apache itself has like this whole surprising origin story.
Oh, exactly. It likely comes from, well, the Zuni word for enemy,
Oh, wow.
which is, yeah, pretty ironic when you think about it. I mean, this name given by outsiders ended up being used for like a whole bunch of different indigenous peoples,
Yeah.
all with their own like unique cultures and histories.
Right. So we're talking about groups like the Chiricahua, Mescalero, Jicarilla, right? All those who lived in that huge region from New Mexico to Arizona.
Exactly. And they had centuries of experience
Ah.
navigating encounters with first, Spanish colonists and then Mexican forces, often through alliances,
Hmm.
sometimes, strategic conflicts.
Yeah. And then things get even more complicated right before the Mexican-American War. Many Apache groups actually sided with the U.S. against Mexico.
That's right. But after the U.S. won and took over these huge territories, including Apache lands, those relationships just completely flipped. Imagine, you're Apache and the people you just allied with are now suddenly your rivals for land and resources.
It's almost like it set the stage for conflict right there. And then on top of that, you have all those American settlers coming in, especially during the gold rush, which just added fuel to the fire.
Oh, absolutely. Put a lot of pressure on Apache lands, which led to more tension and then, well, violence.
Now, one of the things that people often point to is the 1861 Bascom affair, the one with the kidnapped boy and the killings that followed. A lot of people say that was the sole trigger for the Apache Wars, but Douglas Hawking suggests it's not really that simple.
Yeah, that incident is often, how should I say, oversimplified. The Bascom affair was definitely a flashpoint, right? But you got to look at the bigger picture. The American Civil War was going on at the same time, and that had a massive impact out west. They had to pull troops back, and that created a power vacuum that really contributed to the whole like escalating tension.
So the Bascom affair was more like a spark that ignited an already volatile situation.
Yeah, exactly. Like throwing a match on a pile of dry wood. It was primed for conflict. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the thing is, the Apache Wars, it wasn't even one war, right? It was this whole string of skirmishes and raids, retaliations that went on for decades. And from the Apache perspective, they were just defending their homelands, defending their way of life against encroachment, displacement.
It's like history is rarely black and white.
Right.
There are so many layers to it.
Absolutely. And the U.S. Army's tactics made it even more complicated. They started using Apache scouts to track down and fight other Apache groups.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
seems like a divide and conquer kind of strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
That must have created some serious ethical issues.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So you have General George Crook, right? He was a key figure in the Army's campaigns against the Apache. And he believed those Apache scouts were essential. They knew the terrain, they knew the tactics better than anybody else.
Crook's strategy was, well, it worked, militarily speaking, it was effective, but it came at a huge cost for the Apache people. I mean, they were forced to choose sides, potentially fight their own people. Just think about that for a minute.
Yeah. What a terrible position to be in. It must have been devastating for the relationships between different Apache groups.
Oh, definitely. Really highlights how the U.S. government often manipulated and exploited divisions within Native American communities as they expanded westward.
It's a dark side of history. And you can't talk about the Apache Wars without mentioning Geronimo. He's often portrayed as this like legendary symbol of resistance. But from what I understand, Douglas Hawking offers a very different take.
He does. And it might surprise you to learn that Geronimo, he, well, he probably wasn't even that prominent of a leader within his own community.
Really?
Hawking suggests his role has been romanticized,
Yeah.
made into something bigger than it was, and that his notoriety was really, well, more of a creation of the media.
Wow. That's fascinating. I always thought of him as a major leader. Makes you wonder about how history gets written and whose voices get heard.
It really does. Hawking's work makes us question, the traditional narratives we have about these conflicts, and really dig deeper into the complexities of the Apache Wars.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect transition to our next point because as all these conflicts were going on, the U.S. government was developing this system that would have a huge impact on Native American communities, a lasting impact, the reservation system.
Reservation system, yeah.
So,
It was a big turning point in the relationship between the U.S. government and Native American tribes. It was meant to confine and control Native American populations, often pushing them onto land that wasn't really that good. And in many cases, it violated existing treaties.
so it wasn't just about like setting aside land, it was a way to restrict their movement, their freedom, control their way of life.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this system, it started way back in the early 1800s. And it still has implications today, major implications for Native American communities.
Huh.
But that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive. So as we kind of dig into the reservation system, you start to see how it really impacted the daily lives of, well, the Apache people. It was such a change from their nomadic way of life.
Yeah, I can imagine. Being forced to like stay within these boundaries must have been a really tough transition.
It was, and you can see it in the conditions on the reservations. Hawking talks about how the government rations were like super meager. Often it was just, flour and sugar, maybe some coffee, not nearly enough food for families who are used to, a much more diverse diet from all the hunting and gathering they did.
It sounds almost like they were being like intentionally deprived.
Well, the government's intentions with the reservation system, they're complex. On one hand, yeah, they provided some support, but there were always strings attached.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal was assimilation, to get Native Americans to fit into mainstream American society, even if it meant, sacrificing their own cultural practices, their traditions.
So it wasn't just about controlling their land, it was about controlling their culture, their whole identity.
Yeah, pretty much. They set up these agencies on the reservations to, manage things, to oversee the rations, trade, basically just dictate daily life. They even created boarding schools. Native American children were forced to go to them. They had to abandon their language, their customs. Just imagine that, having your children taken away to be, quote unquote, civilized.
It's hard to even think about the trauma, the loss of their heritage. But what's amazing is how the Apache, despite all this, they adapted. They held on to their identity.
It's really inspiring, their resilience. They took all those skills they developed over generations, farming, hunting, crafting, and they applied them to this new environment, like the Chiricahua Apache. They were known for being amazing horsemen, incredible raiders, and they became, well, skilled ranchers and cattle herders.
It shows how determined they were to keep their way of life, even in those, totally different circumstances.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But let's be real. The reservation system was, and still is, messed up. I mean, the reservations often became places of poverty, limited opportunities. And the thing is, the government's assimilation policies, they often backfired. They created this cycle of, dependency and resentment.
It's a really stark reminder of, the long-term effects of colonization,
Right.
the systemic injustices Native Americans still face today.
You got it. The Apache Wars, the reservation system, they're all part of this bigger story, right? The story of westward expansion and the displacement of indigenous peoples across North America. Broken treaties, cultural misunderstandings, a legacy of trauma that still affects people today.
Yeah. And it's not just history, right? These injustices from the past have real consequences in the present. Native Americans being forced off their land led to like devastating social and economic impacts, cultural impacts, the struggles for tribal sovereignty, the fights for resources, even the efforts to like revive their languages and cultures. It's all connected.
Exactly. And when we talk about the reservation system, it's important to remember it didn't just appear overnight. It evolved, changed over time. It was shaped by all these different government policies and, of course, the constant pressure of westward expansion.
So I'm curious, how did the system actually come to be? Like, where did it all start?
Well, the roots of the reservation system, they go all the way back to the early 1800s.
So the reservation system, it sounds like it didn't just suddenly appear, it developed over time. What were some of the like major turning points?
Well, one that really stands out is the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
1830. Okay.
Yeah, President Andrew Jackson signed it. And it basically gave them the power to force Native American tribes to move from their lands in the Southeast. They were moved to territories west of the Mississippi River.
Oh, wow. So that was a pretty big shift. It must have been really hard for those tribes who had to like leave their homes.
It was devastating. It led to, what's called the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Native Americans died on those forced marches.
Yeah.
It really set the stage for, taking Native American lands and using reservations to, contain and control them.
It's a really dark chapter in American history. Westward expansion came at a big cost for indigenous people.
No doubt. And as the U.S. kept expanding westward, the reservation system, it just became more and more entrenched. They signed treaties,
Hmm.
but often under pressure. And they created reservations, but often on land that wasn't as desirable as what they had before.
So it wasn't just about moving them, it was about putting them on land that was like less valuable, less
Mm.
fertile, and that might not have even been suitable for their traditional ways of life.
Exactly. And then, more settlers kept coming west, more pressure on those reservations, so they got even smaller, fewer resources. The government just kept taking more and more land for settlers, for mining, for railroads.
It sounds like a cycle of just constant displacement, broken promises, and all this while they're trying to like adjust to this whole new way of life that was forced on them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, imagine trying to keep your culture, your traditions, while being forced to assimilate into a society that often saw you as, uh, less than.
And we can't forget about those boarding schools. That was a direct attempt to get rid of their culture.
Yeah, those boarding schools, they were really brutal, taking children from their families, often against their will. They couldn't even speak their own language, couldn't practice their customs. Generations of Native Americans went through that trauma,
Huh.
and the impact is, still felt today.
So the legacy of the reservation system, it's not just about the land, it's about the cultural and emotional scars.
No, you said it. The trauma of losing their home, their language, their traditions, the discrimination they faced, it's had a huge lasting impact on Native American communities.
So where does that leave us today? I mean, what's happening with the reservation system now? Are these injustices being addressed?
The system's still in place,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a growing movement for tribal sovereignty, self-determination. Tribes are fighting for more control over their own, affairs, their resources, their future.
It sounds like a long road, but there's hope for a future where Native American communities can like regain their power and heal from the past.
I think there is, if we understand this history, acknowledge the wrongs that were done, and support Native American communities as they revitalize their cultures, exercise their sovereignty. We can help build a better future, a more just future for everyone.
It's like history isn't just something we learn about. It's something we're like actively shaping every day.
Yeah, I like that.
And if we engage with it in a thoughtful way, a compassionate way, we can all work towards making things better.
Couldn't agree more. And to everyone listening, I hope you keep learning about this. Keep exploring the different cultures, the experiences of Native American tribes. Support their efforts to achieve justice.
This has been a truly insightful look into the Apache Wars and the reservation system. It's complicated, often, a difficult history to grapple with, but it's one that we all need to understand if we want to like truly move forward.
Well, thank you. It's been great sharing these ideas with you.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on this part of American history. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring. We'll catch you next time.